정상 속도보다 빠르게 혹은 정상 속도보다 아주 느리게 들어보면 그 내용을 파악하기는 쉽지 않지만 오히려 그 언어의 고유한 억양과 소리에 더 예민해지기 때문에 더 쉽게 익숙해질 수도 있다고 하네요. 억지로 해석하지 말고 한번 편안하게 소리에 집중해 보시기 바랍니다.
So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why?
복잡한 문법이 아니라 간단한 원칙으로 영어 문장의 구조와 의미를 간단하게 파악하는 데 집중해서요. 영어 문장 구조가 결국에 이런 거구나 라고 느낄 수 있도록 연습해 봅니다. 자, 먼저 동사만 한번 살펴볼게요. left, went, to become 변신한 동사고요. started 이게 뿌리 동사인데 뒤에 ing를 달고 변신했네요. start 다음에는 ing 달고 변신하는 거 저희한테 익숙하죠. 그 다음 비동사, 비동사. 두 개의 문장인데 구조도 아주 평이하고요. 단어도 아주 쉬운 단어들을 사용해서 저희한테 굉장히 도움이 될 만한 좋은 실용적인 표현들을 사용하고 있네요. 한번 보겠습니다. left 앞에서 나온 동사죠. 근데 이번에는 목적어가 the classroom입니다. 자, 교실을 떠났다. 자, 가르치는 일을 이제 또 그만두고 and I went to graduate school. 자, graduate school 이건 대학원이죠. 대학원으로 간 겁니다. 다시 공부를 더 하러 간 거네요. 왜 갔을까요? To become a psychologist. 심리학자가 되려고. 자, 뿌리 동사. 자, and란 접사 뒤에 숨어 나온 동사 그리고 become은 변신했습니다. 뿌리, 변신, 숨어서. 자, 가장 기본적인 원칙을 잘 지켜 만든 문장이죠. 자, 변신한 동사도 목적어를 가질 수 있죠. 아이들과 성인들을 studying, 연구하는 것을 started, 시작했습니다. 자, 어떤 아이들과 성인들이었냐면 in all kinds of super challenging settings. 그 모든 종류의 엄청나게 도전적인 상황에 놓여 있는 아이들과 성인들. 그냥 놀고 있는 아이들과 성인들이 아니고요. 뭔가에 도전하고 있는 아이들과 성인들을 연구하기 시작한 거죠. And 그리고 in every study, 모든 이 연구에서 my question was, 내가 질문한 건 뭐였냐면요. Who is successful here? 누가 여기서 성공할까? And why? 그리고 왜 성공했을까? 바로 이런 질문을 갖고 연구를 했다라는 거죠.
So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why?
하루에 짧게 일부분만 집중해서 공부를 하고 대신에 매일 하루에 한 번씩 전체를 처음부터 끝까지 다 들어보고 다음 날에 이어서 일부분을 다시 집중해서 공부를 하고 영상 전체를 다 들어보고 자, 이렇게 영상 하나를 다 보고 나면 뭔가 달라지겠죠? 자, 일부분을 집중해서 공부를 해봤으니까요. 이제 전체 영상을 한번 편안하게 들어보세요.
When I was 27 years old, I left a very demanding job in management consulting for a job that was even more demanding, teaching. I went to teach 7th graders math in the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests, I gave out homework assignments. When the work came back, I calculated grades. What struck me was that IQ was not the only difference between my best and my worst students. Some of my strongest performers did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking. The kinds of things you need to learn in 7th grade math, sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not impossible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn the material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires, and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure, things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out. To me, the most shocking thing about grit is how little we know, how little science knows about building it. Every day, parents and teachers ask me, how do I build grit in kids? What do I do to teach kids a solid work ethic? How do I keep them motivated for the long run? The honest answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that talent doesn't make you gritty. Our data show very clearly that there are many talented individuals who simply do not follow through on their commitments. In fact, in our data, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Carol Dweck, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail, because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. So growth mindset is a great idea for building grit, but we need more. And that's where I'm going to end my remarks, because that's where we are. That's the work that stands before us. We need to take our best ideas, our strongest intuitions, and we need to test them. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned. In other words, we need to be gritty about getting our kids grittier. Thank you.
영어 문장 속에서 동사가 등장할 수 있는 방법은 딱 세 가지밖에 없습니다. 뿌리거나 뿌리가 아니면 변신 혹은 숨어서 나오는 거죠.